September 17, 1944. 23:47 hours. Lieutenant David Brenner crouched at the intersection of Utrecht-Zug and Stationstraat in the Dutch city of Arnhem, studying a captured German street sign by the light of a shielded flashlight while 142 men from Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, British 1st Airborne Division waited in the darkness behind him. The sign read, Centrum 2.5 kilometers, with an arrow pointing east along Utrecht-Zug. Brenner's map showed the Arnhem Road bridge lying 2.8 kilometers to the southeast. The numbers matched closely enough. The direction felt correct. He ordered his company to advance. They had been fighting for 6 hours since landing by glider at 1400 hours that afternoon. Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne assault in military history. 3 airborne divisions dropped into the Netherlands to seize bridges across the Rhine and Maas rivers, creating a corridor for armored divisions to drive into Germany and end the war by Christmas. Charlie Company's mission was simple on paper. March from the landing zone to Arnhem Bridge. Secure the northern approach. Hold until XXX Corps arrived with tanks. Intelligence estimated a 48-hour wait. The company carried ammunition and rations for 3 days. The plan assumed minimal German resistance. Dutch intelligence reports indicated only second-rate garrison troops in Arnhem. Old men and boys. The reports were catastrophically wrong. The 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions were refitting near Arnhem after retreat from France. Battle-hardened veterans with tanks, artillery, and combat experience that dwarfed anything the British paratroopers had faced. By nightfall on September 17, only Charlie Company remained relatively intact from the original assault force. Alpha Company was pinned down at the railway embankment. Bravo Company had been destroyed trying to reach the bridge via the main road. Charlie Company had been ordered to attempt a flanking approach through the city's northern suburbs. Brenner had graduated from Sandhurst in 1942. 2 years of training. 4 months of combat experience in North Africa and Sicily. This was his first independent command at night in an unfamiliar city. He was 24 years old. His map was a 1:50,000 scale civilian road map purchased from a bookstore in London 3 weeks earlier. It showed major streets but omitted most smaller roads and alleys. Street names were in Dutch. Brenner did not speak Dutch. His compass worked, but compass bearings meant little in narrow streets that twisted and turned unpredictably. Navigation in urban terrain at night is fundamentally different from navigation in open country. In open terrain, compass and terrain features provide reliable orientation. In cities, tall buildings block line of sight to landmarks. Streets curve. Compass bearings change with every turn. Street signs become the primary navigation tool. Brenner's training emphasized the importance of terrain association. Match what you see to what the map shows. Identify distinctive features. The problem was simple and fatal: at night, everything looks the same. Buildings become dark shapes. Intersections all look identical. Street signs are the only distinguishing features visible. The German sign at Utrecht-Zug and Stationstraat appeared straightforward. Centrum meant city center. The bridge was in the city center. Therefore, following the sign toward Centrum should lead toward the bridge. The logic was clean and wrong. Brenner did not know that Centrum in Dutch cities typically refers to the historic market district, not the geographic center. He did not know that Arnhem Centrum lay northwest of the bridge, not southeast. He did not know that the German forces had systematically altered street signs throughout the city to create exactly this kind of confusion for advancing Allied troops. The alteration was not random. German military intelligence had studied how Allied forces navigated in urban areas. They knew that signs were critical. They knew that time pressure, darkness, and combat stress reduced soldiers' ability to verify navigation carefully. They knew that small directional errors compounded over distance. The German 9th SS Panzer Division had spent 3 days before the Allied landings repositioning street signs at key intersections throughout Arnhem. The work was conducted by combat engineers who understood exactly how subtle changes could create maximum confusion. Remove some signs entirely. Rotate others 90 degrees. Change distance markers. Add ambiguous directions. At the Utrecht-Zug intersection, the Germans had done something particularly clever. The original sign had pointed northwest toward the Old Town Market. The Germans had rotated at 135 degrees so it now pointed east. They had changed the distance from 0.8 kilometers to 2.5 kilometers. Anyone following the sign would walk directly away from the bridge while believing they were approaching it. Brenner studied the sign for approximately 45 seconds before making his decision. 45 seconds of flashlight-illuminated map reading while German patrols operated within 200 meters of his position. 45 seconds was not enough time to notice the subtle wrongness of the sign's position, the freshness of the mounting bracket, the slight color mismatch between the sign's blue paint and the weathered posts. At 23:49, he gave the order. Charlie Company moved east along Utrechtszug. Single file. 5-meter intervals. Weapons ready. Moving through darkness past shuttered houses where frightened Dutch civilians hid in cellars and listened to boots striking cobblestones. The sound of 142 men walking in combat boots cannot be silenced. The British paratroopers tried. They walked on the balls of their feet. They avoided metal surfaces. They whispered warnings about obstacles. But the cumulative noise of steel-shod boots, equipment rattling, rifles bumping against doorframes carried through the night. German listening posts heard them. The Germans had excellent night discipline. They did not use lights. They did not smoke. They waited and listened and passed information via field telephone to command posts that plotted Charlie Company's movement on detailed city maps. Brenner walked at the head of the column with his platoon sergeant, Sergeant Major William Crawford. Crawford was 32, a career soldier who had fought in France in 1940, evacuated from Dunkirk, fought in North Africa, earned the military medal for valor at El Alamein. He trusted Brenner but believed the lieutenant was moving too fast. "Sir," Crawford whispered at 23:52. "We should confirm our position before proceeding further." Brenner checked his map again. According to his dead reckoning, they had moved 400 meters east. The sign had indicated 2.5 kilometers to Centrum. That left approximately 2,100 meters. At current pace, they should reach the bridge area in 35 minutes. Time was critical. Other companies were already engaged. Charlie Company needed to reach its objective before dawn. "We're on course, Sergeant Major." "Keep moving." Crawford said nothing more. He followed orders. This was how military discipline worked. The lieutenant made decisions. The sergeant major executed them. Even when the sergeant major knew the decision was wrong. At 0:03 on September 18, Charlie Company passed the intersection of Utrechtszug and Velperweg. A 2nd Street sign read, "Velp 3 kilometers," with an arrow pointing northeast. Brenner consulted his map. Velp was a village northeast of Arnhem. The sign's direction matched his map. This seemed to confirm that his navigation was accurate. He did not realize that moving toward Velp meant moving away from the bridge. He did not notice that the sign's arrow alignment was slightly off. He continued east. Behind Brenner, his company moved through darkness past buildings that grew progressively more suburban. Shops gave way to houses. Houses gave way to small gardens. The density of the urban environment was decreasing. This should have warned Brenner that he was moving away from the city center, not toward it. But exhaustion affects judgment. Brenner had been awake for 22 hours. He had jumped from an aircraft, fought a running battle through hostile territory, lost 18 men to German fire, and now was responsible for navigating through an unfamiliar city in complete darkness with minimal information. His brain was operating on adrenaline and willpower. At 0:17, Private James Holland, walking in the middle of the column, noticed something wrong. The houses they were passing had large gardens. The streets were getting wider. This did not match his mental image of a route toward a bridge in a city center. City centers were dense. Commercial. These streets looked residential. Outer suburbs. Holland mentioned his concern to his section commander, Corporal Edward Price. Price agreed but said nothing to higher command. Privates do not question lieutenants' navigation. The chain of command exists for a reason. At 0:23, Charlie Company reached the eastern edge of Arnhem. The street ended at a T-junction. To the north, open fields. To the south, more residential streets. Directly ahead, darkness. Brenner checked his map. He estimated they had traveled approximately 1,200 meters from the original intersection. This should have placed them near the bridge approach. Instead, they stood at the city's edge facing empty countryside. Brenner realized the error. He had been following the wrong route. The street sign had lied. 0:26 hours. Lieutenant Brenner stood at the T-junction studying his map while 142 men waited behind him in silence. The realization arrived not as sudden understanding but as slow, creeping dread. Wrong direction. Wrong streets. Wrong position. The question was not whether he had made a mistake. The question was how to correct it without losing more time, more men, more combat effectiveness. Every minute spent stationary was a minute German forces used to reposition, reinforce, prepare ambushes. Sergeant Major Crawford moved forward to Brenner's position. "Sir, we're too far east." "I know, Sergeant Major. The bridge is southwest of our current position. Approximately 2,800 meters by direct line. Probably 4,000 meters by available streets." Brenner traced potential routes on his map. Every option required moving back through the streets they had just traversed, past German positions that now knew Charlie Company's approximate location. The alternative was cutting through unknown territory, navigating without street signs through areas his map showed as residential districts with winding roads. "We backtrack to WWII," Brenner decided. "Take the southern route toward the river." "Sir, the Germans know we're here. They've had time to prepare positions along our return route. Then we move quietly and fast." Crawford knew this was optimistic. 142 men could not move quietly through a city at night, especially when those men were tired, scared, and aware they were lost in hostile territory. But orders were orders. At 0:31, Charlie Company reversed direction. They moved west along Utrechtszug, retracing their route. The men were silent. Everyone understood what had happened. The lieutenant had followed a bad sign. They had wasted 44 minutes and now occupied an exposed position with diminishing options. Private Holland walked near the center of the column. He was 19 years old, from Manchester, a railway worker before the war. This was his first combat operation. He had been excited during the flight over the English Channel, terrified during the landing, and exhausted since. Now he was angry. The anger was not directed at Lieutenant Brenner specifically. It was directed at the whole situation. The bad planning. The inaccurate intelligence. The failure to account for the basic reality that cities are confusing at night and street signs can be wrong. Someone in headquarters should have anticipated this. But headquarters was 100 kilometers away in England, planning the next phase of Operation Market Garden while assuming Charlie Company had already reached the bridge. No one at headquarters knew Charlie Company was lost. At 0:41, Charlie Company was passing the intersection of Utrechtszug and WWII when the first German machine gun opened fire from a second-story window 80 meters to the north. Tracer rounds cut through darkness. The MG-42 fired at 1,200 rounds per minute. The sound was distinctive, a harsh tearing noise unlike any Allied weapon. Red tracer rounds sparked off cobblestones and walls. Brenner shouted, "Cover," and the company scattered. Men dove behind garden walls, doorways, anything that offered protection. The machine gun traversed left and right, searching for targets. Private Holland threw himself behind a low brick wall. Bullets struck the wall 18 inches above his head. Brick fragments scattered. He pressed himself flat against the ground and tried to become invisible. The machine gun fired for approximately 20 seconds, then stopped. Silence returned. The Germans were conserving ammunition. They knew more targets would present themselves. Brenner assessed the situation. The machine gun position commanded the intersection. Any attempt to cross would expose men to direct fire. The company could attempt to flank the position by moving through buildings, but that would take time and create noise that would alert other German positions. "Sergeant Major, take 1st Platoon and work around to the south. 2nd Platoon will provide suppressing fire. 3rd Platoon remains in reserve." Crawford gathered 1st Platoon, 32 men. They moved south along a narrow side street, staying close to building walls, weapons ready. The street curved left after 40 meters. They disappeared from Brenner's view. 2nd Platoon positioned themselves to provide covering fire. Lieutenant James Morrison commanded 2nd Platoon. He was 26, from Edinburgh, a schoolteacher before the war. He understood that suppressing fire was a calculated exchange, spend ammunition to keep enemy heads down while friendly forces maneuvered. "Open fire on my command," Morrison whispered. "Short bursts. 3 rounds. Pick your spots." At 0:46, Crawford's 1st platoon was in position south of the machine gun. Crawford signaled ready. Morrison gave the order. 2nd platoon opened fire. 32 Lee Enfield rifles fired simultaneously. The sound was enormous in the enclosed street. Bullets tore through the building's second-story facade. Windows shattered. Brick dust exploded. The German machine gun did not return fire. 1st platoon rushed the building. They crashed through the front door. Private Michael O'Brien led the entry. He was 28, from Dublin, had fought in North Africa and Sicily. He knew building clearing techniques. O'Brien moved through the ground floor with his section. Empty. They climbed stairs to the 2nd floor. The machine gun position was in the front room overlooking the intersection. The Germans had left. Spent shell casings covered the floor. The MG-42 was gone. A trap. The grenade came from the back room. O'Brien saw it roll into the hallway, saw its distinctive German stick handle, shouted, "Grenade," and threw himself backward. The explosion killed O'Brien instantly. Shrapnel killed Private Thomas Fletcher standing behind him. Private George Williams lost his right arm below the elbow. Private Kenneth Brown took shrapnel through both legs. The Germans had set a simple ambush. Fire the machine gun to draw attention. Evacuate the weapon. Leave a grenade trap for anyone who entered. The technique required minimal resources and inflicted maximum casualties on predictable enemy responses. Crawford pulled his men out of the building. Williams and Brown needed immediate medical attention. Corporal Edward Lewis, the company medic, moved forward to treat them. Williams was unconscious from shock and blood loss. Brown was screaming. Lewis applied tourniquets, administered morphine, wrapped bandages. 2 dead. 2 seriously wounded. The machine gun was gone. The Germans had melted back into the city. Brenner made a decision. Charlie Company could not continue toward the bridge while carrying seriously wounded men. They lacked stretchers. Moving wounded in combat slowed the entire unit. The mission required speed. The wounded required evacuation. Sergeant Major, detail 4 men to escort the wounded back to the regimental aid station. Crawford selected 4 men. They would attempt to carry Williams and Brown back to friendly lines. This reduced Charlie Company to 136 effective combatants. At 0:57, the reduced company resumed movement. They reached the intersection where the machine gun had been positioned. The street leading south toward the river was clear. Brenner checked his map. If they followed this street for approximately 800 meters, they should reach Anderlangs, a street that ran parallel to the river and connected to the bridge approach. They moved south. The streets were narrow here. Buildings pressed close on both sides. Upper-story windows hung over the street, creating a tunnel effect. Perfect ambush terrain. Private Holland walked in the middle of the column. His hands were shaking. He gripped his rifle tightly to stop the trembling. The machine gun ambush had been his first direct combat experience. The sound of bullets striking stone. The screams of wounded men. The knowledge that he could die at any moment from a source he could not see. This was different from training. Training had targets. Training had rules. Training stopped when someone got hurt. This did not stop. At 1:04, the company reached Anderlangs. The street was wider than the surrounding residential streets. Street lamps had been destroyed, probably by earlier Allied bombing. Broken glass littered the pavement. Brenner turned right along Anderlangs, heading west toward the bridge. According to his map, they should reach the bridge approach in approximately 600 meters. The street was suspiciously empty. Sergeant Major Crawford moved beside Brenner. "Sir, this is too easy." "I know. The Germans are letting us walk into something. What choice do we have?" Crawford had no answer. The company was committed. Turning back meant abandoning the mission. Moving forward meant walking into probable ambush. These were the options that existed in urban combat. Choose the least terrible alternative. At 1:09, they heard the sound of tracked vehicles ahead. German tanks. The noise was distinctive, the clattering of steel tracks on stone pavement, the rumble of heavy engines. Brenner signaled halt. The company froze. The sound grew louder. Multiple vehicles. Moving toward their position. At 1:11, the lead German vehicle appeared. A Panzer IV medium tank rounded the corner 150 meters ahead. Its 75mm main gun swiveled left and right, searching for targets. A second tank followed 30 meters behind. Then a third. Charlie Company had no anti-tank weapons. They had carried PIAT launchers, but those had been lost during the initial landing when their glider crashed. Personal rifles were useless against armor. Grenades might damage treads but required getting close enough to throw, which meant certain death under machine gun fire. Brenner made the only decision possible. Everyone off the street. Into the buildings. Now. The company scattered. Men crashed through doors and windows. Holland dove through a shop window, rolled across broken glass, scrambled behind a counter. The German tanks were 100 meters away. The lead tank's machine gun opened fire. Tracers cut through the street at waist height. Anyone still exposed died instantly. Private Samuel Grant took a burst through the chest. He fell forward onto the pavement. His body twitched once and lay still. The tanks rolled forward slowly. Their commanders knew British paratroopers were in the area. They were conducting a deliberate sweep. Methodical. Professional. The German crews had done this before. Holland crouched behind the shop counter while the tank rumbled past outside. The building shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The noise was overwhelming, a physical presence that filled the space. Then the tank was passed, moving toward the eastern end of the street where the company's rear elements were still evacuating. More machine gun fire. More screams. The Germans were methodically killing anyone who could not reach cover fast enough. Brenner was trapped in a bakery across the street from Holland. He could not see most of his company. Radio communication was impossible. The radios were line-of-sight VHF sets that did not work through building walls. He had no way to coordinate resistance. The company was fragmented across multiple buildings with German armor controlling the street between them. This was what happened when navigation failed. Wrong position. Wrong time. Wrong circumstances. Charlie Company had walked into a German armored patrol with no preparation, no supporting weapons, no avenue of retreat. At 1:14, the third tank stopped directly in front of the bakery where Brenner sheltered. The tank's commander stood in the turret hatch, scanning buildings with binoculars. He was looking for targets. British paratroopers hiding in shops and houses. Brenner pressed himself against the bakery's interior wall. The tank was 3 meters away. He could hear German voices. The commander was speaking to his driver. Brenner did not speak German, but he understood the tactical situation. The Germans were preparing to systematically clear buildings. This meant grenades through windows. This meant machine gun fire through doors. This meant no survivors. The transformation happened slowly. Not a single moment of realization but an accumulation of understanding. Charlie Company was not going to reach the bridge. The mission had failed. The question now was survival. 1:17 hours. Lieutenant Brenner crouched behind a stone oven in a bakery on Onderlangs while a German Panzer IV idled 3 meters away outside the shattered storefront window. Flour dust hung in the air. His breathing sounded impossibly loud. The tank commander was issuing orders. Brenner heard German voices, metallic and sharp through the tank's intercom system. He recognized the tone if not the words. The Germans were organizing a systematic building clearance. Standard urban combat doctrine. Surround. Search. Destroy. Brenner had two choices. Stay hidden and hope the Germans did not search this particular building. Or attempt something desperate before they started clearing operations. Both options were terrible. He checked his watch. 1:18, dawn would come at approximately 6:45. 5 hours and 27 minutes. His company was scattered across dozens of buildings. He had no communication with most of his men. He had no anti-tank weapons. He had no way to coordinate a breakout. The tank's engine note changed. The driver was preparing to move. Brenner risked looking through the broken window. The tank commander was descending into the turret. The hatch clanged shut. The tank lurched forward. Good. Movement meant the Germans were continuing their patrol, not beginning immediate clearance operations. That bought time. Minutes. Maybe an hour if Charlie Company remained completely silent. Across the street, Private Holland lay flat beneath a shop counter listening to the tank rumble past. He had cut his hands on broken glass diving through the window. Blood soaked his sleeves. The pain was sharp but manageable. Worse was the fear. He had thought he understood fear during training. The instructors had tried to simulate combat stress. Blank ammunition. Controlled explosions. Shouted commands. But nothing simulated this. The knowledge that German tanks were hunting him. The certainty that if he made noise, he would die. The third tank passed Holland's position. The floor vibrated. Bottles rattled on shelves behind the counter. Holland held his breath until the noise faded. Then silence returned. Not complete silence. The night carried distant sounds. Gunfire to the south. Artillery to the east. But here, temporarily, quiet. At 1:23, Brenner moved to the bakery's rear door. He needed to regroup his company. He needed to assess casualties. He needed to determine if continuing toward the bridge was possible or if withdrawal was the only option. All of that required communication. The door opened onto a narrow alley. Brenner checked both directions. Empty. He moved along the alley to the building's corner, where he had line of sight to the shop where Sergeant Major Crawford had taken cover. Crawford saw him. Recognition flashed. Crawford pointed at his own eyes, then pointed at the street. German patrol still active. Stay down. Brenner nodded. They waited. Minutes stretched. At 1:31, they heard the tanks moving away to the west. The engine noise faded. Still dangerous. German infantry likely remained in the area, but the immediate armor threat had passed. Brenner crossed the street in a low run. Reached Crawford's position. Casualties? Grant dead. Saw him go down. Unknown number wounded. Lost contact with 3rd Platoon when the tanks appeared. We need to consolidate. Can't continue forward like this. Agreed. Permission to bring the men together in this building. 2-story, stone construction, good sight lines. Brenner considered. Consolidating meant concentrating the company, making them a single target. But fragmentation meant losing command and control entirely. Do it. Silent movement. Pass the word through hand signals. No voices. Crawford moved to the doorway and began signaling to nearby positions. Paratroopers had excellent nonverbal communication training. Hand signals could convey complex messages. Move here. Stay low. Watch that direction. Come quietly. Over the next 18 minutes, Charlie Company gradually assembled in the 2-story building. Not all of them. 3rd Platoon was missing. Lieutenant Andrew Hastings commanded 3rd Platoon. 34 men. They had been at the column's rear when the tanks appeared. No one knew their current location. By 1:52, Brenner had assembled 94 men in defensible positions throughout the building. Ground floor windows covered the street. Second floor windows provided overwatch of approaches. Not ideal, but workable. Corporal Lewis, the medic, moved through the building treating wounded. 6 men had been hit by tank machine gun fire. 2 were serious. Private Martin Shaw had taken rounds through his left shoulder and upper chest. He was conscious but losing blood rapidly. Private Dennis Cole had shrapnel wounds from ricocheting bullets. Less serious but still requiring treatment. Lewis worked quickly. Morphine. Pressure bandages. Sulfa powder. The familiar rhythm of battlefield medicine. Keep them alive. Evacuate when possible. Hope they survive long enough to reach proper surgical care. Brenner gathered his remaining officers and senior NCOs. Crawford. Lieutenant Morrison from 2nd Platoon. Sergeant Peter Wilson from 1st Platoon. They studied Brenner's map by shielded flashlight. Current position. Brenner pointed. Approximately 500 meters east of the bridge. Maybe 600. Difficult to determine precisely. We've been wandering for almost 2 hours, Morrison said. His voice was flat. Exhausted. Brigade expects us in position by now. Brigade doesn't know we got lost. Do we continue toward the bridge? Brenner looked at the faces around him. Crawford's expression was neutral, professionally blank. Morrison looked skeptical. Wilson looked tired. None of them wanted to voice the obvious conclusion. We've lost 48 men, Brenner said. Dead, wounded, or missing. We're combat ineffective for offensive operations. Continuing forward means losing more men for no tactical gain. What are you saying, sir? Wilson asked. I'm saying the mission has changed. We can't take the bridge with 94 men and no support. But we can provide harassment. Delay German reinforcements. Create confusion. Make them commit resources to dealing with us. This was the tactical calculus of failed operations. When the original mission becomes impossible, what can still be accomplished? Charlie Company could not seize and hold the bridge approach. But they could disrupt German operations in this sector. They could conduct ambushes. They could force the Germans to maintain security patrols. They could justify their existence as a combat unit. Crawford understood immediately. Fighting withdrawal. Hit and move. Make them pay for every block. Exactly. We'll need to link up with 3rd Platoon. If they're still operational. Send out a patrol. 2 men. Scout the area where we last saw Hastings. Crawford selected Corporal Price and Private Holland for the reconnaissance patrol. Price was experienced, steady under pressure. Holland was new but had proven himself during the earlier machine gun ambush. At 2:11, Price and Holland slipped out the building's rear door into the alley. They moved east, retracing the route where Charlie Company had been scattered by the German armor. Holland felt strange moving through darkness with just one companion. In training, patrols were always larger. Squad-sized at minimum. 2 men felt exposed. Vulnerable. Every shadow could hide German infantry. Every sound could be an enemy approaching. They moved carefully. Stop. Listen. Move. Stop. Listen. The technique was painfully slow but necessary. Better to take 30 minutes covering 200 meters than to walk into an ambush. At 2:27, they found the first body. Private Samuel Grant, killed by the tank's machine gun. He lay face down in the middle of Onderlangs. His rifle had fallen nearby. Price checked for identification tags, confirmed the body, whispered a brief prayer. They continued. At 2:34, they heard voices ahead. German. Multiple speakers. Price froze. Holland pressed against a building wall. The voices were coming from around the next corner, approximately 30 meters ahead. Price signaled to Holland. Stay here. I'll look. Price moved forward alone, staying in shadows. He reached the corner. Risked looking. A German squad. 8 men. They were standing in the street examining captured British equipment. Helmets. Rifles. A radio set. The equipment belonged to 3rd Platoon. This was where Hastings' men had been caught. Price watched for 2 minutes. The Germans were relaxed. Smoking. Talking casually. They believed this sector was secure. No immediate threat. Price noted their positions, counted weapons, assessed their alertness. Then he withdrew. Back at Holland's position, Price whispered the situation. 3rd Platoon got overrun. The Germans have their equipment. I didn't see any British prisoners. Either they escaped or they're dead. Should we go back? Nothing more to see here. Lieutenant needs to know. They retraced their route. Arrived at the company's position at 2:48. Price reported to Brenner. 3rd Platoon was gone. 34 men. Unknown status. Brenner absorbed this. Charlie Company was now reduced to 94 men. 3 platoons reduced to 2 understrength platoons and a headquarters element. The mathematics of attrition. The Germans were winning through simple arithmetic. Each engagement reduced British strength. Each loss was irreplaceable. The Germans could afford losses because they had reserves, reinforcements, local superiority. "Sir," Crawford said. "We need to make a decision. Stay here until dawn and try for the bridge. Or withdraw to a more defensible position." Brenner studied his map. The bridge was still the objective. Brigade was counting on Charlie Company to support the assault. But Brigade had also counted on Charlie Company arriving 90 minutes ago. Plans had changed. The tactical situation had evolved beyond the original mission parameters. "We stay mobile," Brenner decided. "Small unit actions. Ambushes. We can't take the bridge, but we can make the Germans commit forces to hunt us. Every German squad looking for us is one less squad reinforcing the bridge defenses." This was the logic of guerrilla warfare. When you cannot win conventional engagements, change the nature of the fight. Become a problem that requires resources to solve. Force the enemy to disperse their strength looking for you. At 3:05, Charlie Company split into 4 separate groups. Each group consisted of approximately 24 men commanded by an officer or senior NCO. They would operate independently, conducting ambushes against German patrols, then withdrawing before German reinforcements arrived. Brenner took command of one group. Morrison commanded another. Wilson commanded a third. Crawford commanded the fourth. They synchronized watches, established rendezvous points, and agreed to reassemble at dawn near their current position if possible. Holland found himself assigned to Brenner's group. He was pleased. The lieutenant had made mistakes, but he was still the commanding officer. His presence provided psychological reassurance that someone was in charge, that events were following some kind of plan. Brenner's group moved north from Onderlangs, into residential streets where German presence was less concentrated. The objective was to find German patrols or supply convoys, hit them hard, and vanish before reinforcements arrived. At 3:23, they found their first target. A German supply truck moving slowly along a narrow street. No escort. Single driver visible in the cab. The truck was carrying ammunition boxes visible through the open rear canvas. Brenner positioned his group in a classic L-shaped ambush. The long axis of the L paralleled the street. The short axis covered the kill zone directly. When the truck reached the optimal position, both elements would fire simultaneously, destroying the vehicle and killing the driver before he could alert other German units. The truck approached. 50 meters. 40 meters. 30 meters. Brenner raised his hand. The signal to prepare. Every rifle was aimed at the truck's cab and cargo area. The truck reached the kill zone. Brenner dropped his hand. 24 rifles fired simultaneously. The noise was enormous in the confined street. The truck's windshield shattered. The driver slumped forward. Bullets punched through the canvas cover. Ammunition boxes exploded. Secondary detonations tore through the cargo bed. Flames erupted. "Move!" Brenner shouted. The group scattered immediately. This was the crucial discipline of ambush warfare. Hit fast. Leave fast. Never stay to observe results. The smoke and flames from the burning truck would attract German attention within minutes. They ran through alleys and gardens, putting distance between themselves and the ambush site. At 3:31, they reached a defensive position in an abandoned house 3 blocks away. Holland's heart was pounding. His first successful combat action. They had destroyed an enemy vehicle. They had killed the driver. They had eliminated ammunition that would have been used against British forces. But the feeling was not triumphant. It was strange. Hollow. They had accomplished a small tactical victory that would have zero strategic effect. The Germans had thousands of trucks. Destroying one changed nothing about the overall situation. It was a gesture. A statement that Charlie Company still existed and could still fight. At 3:47, they heard explosions to the south. Morrison's group or Wilson's group had engaged another target. German flares rose into the sky, illuminating the city in flickering white light. The Germans were responding. Organizing sweeps. Bringing in reinforcements. Brenner's radio crackled. Finally. Communications had been impossible during the earlier confusion, but now someone was transmitting on the company frequency. It was Lieutenant Morrison. Charlie 6, this is Charlie 2. We engaged German infantry. Estimate squad strength. We lost 3 men. Withdrawing east. Over. Charlie 2, this is Charlie 6. Understood. Continue withdrawal. Rendezvous at primary rally point. Over. Negative, Charlie 6. Germans between us and rally point. Will attempt alternate. Over. Charlie 2, confirm your position. Over. No response. The radio went silent. Morrison's group was cut off. At 4:15, Crawford's group made radio contact. They had ambushed a German motorcycle courier, killed the rider, captured documents. The documents showed German positions throughout the city. Detailed maps. Troop deployments. Exactly the intelligence that brigade needed. But Crawford's group could not return to British lines. German forces had sealed the routes west toward the bridge. Crawford was requesting orders. Brenner made his decision. All elements, this is Charlie 6. New mission. Gather intelligence. Avoid large engagements. Stay alive until relief arrives. Charlie 6 out. This was not the mission they had trained for. This was not the mission they had been ordered to accomplish. But this was the mission that remained possible. Survival. Harassment. Intelligence gathering. Small victories in a losing situation. At 4:43, Brenner's group heard heavy fighting to the west. Artillery. Machine guns. The distinctive sound of British Bren guns firing in controlled bursts. Other British units were engaging German forces near the bridge. The main battle was continuing without Charlie Company. Holland listened to the distant fighting. He wondered if this was what the whole operation was like. Units getting separated. Fighting isolated actions. Everyone trying to accomplish small objectives while the larger battle developed beyond their knowledge or control. At 5:15, gray light began showing in the eastern sky. Dawn was approaching. Visibility was improving. German forces would intensify their sweeps once they could see clearly. Charlie Company's freedom of movement would disappear. Brenner ordered his group to find a defendable building where they could hide during daylight hours. They located a 3-story house with good sight lines and a solid stone structure. They moved inside and established defensive positions. By 5:45, they were settled. Sentries watching all approaches. Wounded men receiving treatment. Everyone else resting, eating cold rations, checking ammunition. The transformation was complete. Charlie Company had stopped being an assault force and had become a resistance cell. They would hide during the day. Move at night. Conduct small operations. Wait for rescue or destruction. September 21, 1944. 17:30 hours. Lieutenant Brenner sat in a British military hospital in Nijmegen, 35 kilometers south of Arnhem, while a medical officer sutured a shrapnel wound in his left shoulder and asked questions about Operation Market Garden's failures. Charlie Company had survived for 4 days behind German lines in Arnhem. 94 men had become 41 men through continuous attrition. They had conducted 17 separate ambushes. They had destroyed 6 German vehicles. They had killed an estimated 43 German soldiers. They had gathered intelligence documents that British intelligence officers described as extremely valuable. And they had accomplished exactly nothing toward their original mission. The bridge at Arnhem had not been taken. The 1st Airborne Division had been destroyed. Of the 10,000 British and Polish paratroopers who landed near Arnhem, fewer than 2,400 escaped. The rest were dead or captured. Operation Market Garden had failed. The war would not end by Christmas. The plan to drive through the Netherlands into Germany had collapsed. The fault lay with many factors, but Brenner knew his own mistake had contributed. Following a street sign without verification. 44 minutes wasted moving in the wrong direction. 44 minutes that might have made the difference. The medical officer finished the suturing. "You'll have a scar, Lieutenant. The shrapnel's out, but the muscle tissue is damaged. 6 weeks recovery minimum. Possibly longer. Brenner barely heard him. His mind was elsewhere. Replaying the moment at the intersection. The street sign pointing east. The decision to trust it. Everything that followed from that single choice. "Lieutenant?" The medical officer was speaking to him. "Are you listening?" "Yes, sir." 6 weeks. "I'm recommending you for extended rest. What you people went through in Arnhem was extraordinary. The psychological effects." "I understand, sir." But he did not understand. Not really. Understanding would come later, in quiet moments over the following years. Understanding would arrive when he read after-action reports describing how German forces had systematically prepared Arnhem for defense. How they had studied Allied tactics. How they had altered street signs throughout the city to create exactly the kind of confusion that Charlie Company experienced. Understanding would come when he learned that 14 other British units had been similarly misdirected during the first night of Operation Market Garden. That Charlie Company's experience was not unique. That the Germans had executed a brilliantly simple deception operation that exploited how armies navigate in urban terrain. Understanding would come when he realized that war is not about perfect information and optimal decisions. War is about incomplete information, time pressure, exhaustion, fear, and the inevitable mistakes that accumulate until they become catastrophic. Private Holland survived the war. He returned to Manchester in 1945, resumed his job with the railway, married, raised 2 children. He rarely spoke about Arnhem. When asked, he would say it was confusing and change the subject. The memories were too complex. Too painful. Too layered with guilt and relief and anger. In 1967, Holland attended a veterans' reunion in London. He met other survivors of Charlie Company. They had all aged. Gray hair. Thickening waistlines. The passage of 23 years. But they remembered. They remembered being lost. They remembered the street sign. They remembered Lieutenant Brenner's mistake and how it had shaped everything that followed. But they did not blame Brenner. Everyone understood. War made mistakes inevitable. The question was not whether mistakes would happen. The question was how you responded when they did. Brenner himself survived until 1983. He lived quietly in Scotland, worked as a civil engineer, designed bridges. The irony was not lost on him. He spent his professional life building structures that helped people cross obstacles safely. In 1944, he had failed to cross a bridge in Arnhem because he followed a deceptive sign. In 1979, a military historian interviewed Brenner for a book about Operation Market Garden. The historian wanted to understand what had gone wrong in Arnhem. Brenner explained about the street sign. The historian was fascinated. He had found references to German deception operations in captured documents, but few specific examples. Brenner's story provided concrete details. "Did you know," the historian said, "that the Germans considered their street sign alterations to be one of their most successful defensive preparations? They estimated it delayed Allied units by an average of 2 to 3 hours. "I didn't know that," Brenner said. "Your experience was typical. The Germans understood that navigating at night in unfamiliar cities is extremely difficult. They exploited that vulnerability. Simple. Cheap. Effective. It worked. It did. But I want you to understand something, Lieutenant. Even if you had found the correct route that night, Charlie Company probably wouldn't have reached the bridge. The Germans had overwhelming force in that sector. Analysis suggests no single company could have succeeded in breaking through to the bridge on the first night." Brenner absorbed this. "You're saying my mistake didn't matter? I'm saying the operation was already failing for reasons beyond your control. Your mistake was one small factor among many. The real failure was at higher command levels. Inadequate intelligence. Unrealistic planning. Insufficient support. You did the best you could with the information and resources available. This should have been comforting. But it was not. Because Brenner knew that doing your best was not adequate when men's lives depended on your decisions. Samuel Grant had died. Martin Shaw had died. Dennis Cole had died. 3rd Platoon had been destroyed. Those men died because Brenner followed a street sign without verification. The historian left. Brenner sat alone in his study. On the wall hung a framed photograph of Charlie Company taken in England before the operation. 142 young men. Confident. Excited. Ready for combat. Most of them had not survived. The photograph was a memorial to optimism and ignorance. The street sign was never recovered. After the war, Arnhem was rebuilt. Old signs were replaced with new signs. The specific intersection where Brenner made his decision was redeveloped. Modern buildings. Different street layout. The physical evidence of the deception was erased by time and reconstruction. But the lesson remained. In military academies and officer training courses, instructors teach about Arnhem. They explain how the Germans prepared the urban battlefield. They emphasize the importance of verifying navigation information. They use Charlie Company as an example of what happens when you trust a street sign in enemy territory. The lectures are clinical. Professional. They analyze the tactical situation objectively. They identify key decision points. They discuss alternative courses of action. What the lectures cannot convey is the feeling. The exhaustion. The fear. The time pressure. The weight of responsibility when 142 men are following your orders in darkness and you must make decisions with incomplete information. In 2003, a Dutch municipal worker was digging a foundation for a new building near the site of what had been Onderlangs in 1944. He found a rusted street sign buried in the rubble. The sign read, Centrum 2.5 kilometers, with an arrow that had rotated on its mounting. The worker recognized the sign's historical significance and donated it to the Arnhem War Museum. The museum catalogued the sign as German deception material, September 1944. They placed it in a display case with a photograph of the intersection as it appeared during the battle. The display included a brief explanation of how German forces had altered signs throughout the city to confuse Allied units. Thousands of visitors see the sign each year. They read the explanation. They understand intellectually what happened. What they cannot understand is the human reality. The lieutenant studying the sign by flashlight. The decision made in seconds. The consequences that extended for hours and days and years and lives. The sign sits in its display case. Metal corroded by decades underground. Paint faded. Arrow bent. It is a small artifact. Historically insignificant compared to the weapons and equipment displayed in other cases. But it represents something fundamental about warfare. War is not only about courage and sacrifice and grand strategy. War is also about confusion and mistakes and small deceptions that produce outsized effects. A street sign rotated 135 degrees. A lieutenant who trusted it. A company that followed him. The mathematics of error accumulating into disaster. In 2015, the British Ministry of Defence declassified documents related to Operation Market Garden. Among these documents was Lieutenant Brenner's after-action report written in October 1944. The report is remarkably candid. Brenner does not excuse his mistake. He describes exactly what happened. The sign. The decision. The consequences. The report concludes with a recommendation: all units operating in urban terrain should treat street signs with extreme skepticism. Assume all signs may be compromised. Verify all navigation information through multiple sources. Do not rely on any single indicator. The cost of error is too high. This was Brenner's legacy. Not the bridge he failed to reach. Not the men he lost. But the lesson he transmitted. A lesson that became doctrine. That influenced training. That saved lives in subsequent operations because soldiers learned to question what they saw. The bridge at Arnhem still stands. It was rebuilt after the war. Modern concrete construction replaced the steel structure that British paratroopers fought to capture. The new bridge serves commercial traffic. Cars and trucks cross the Rhine daily. Few drivers think about the battle that occurred there in September 1944. But near the bridge, on the northern approach where Charlie Company was supposed to position itself, there is a small memorial. Stone. Simple design. It lists the names of British and Polish soldiers who died attempting to take the bridge. Samuel Grant's name is there. Martin Shaw's name. Dennis Cole's name. 144 names total. Lieutenant Brenner never visited the memorial. He could not. The memories were too painful. But in 1982, 1 year before his death, he wrote a letter to the Arnhem City Council. The letter described what had happened on the night of September 17 to 18, 1944. It explained about the street sign. It asked that something be done to ensure visitors understood how small factors could have large consequences. The council responded by adding an interpretive panel near the memorial. The panel describes German preparations for the battle. It mentions the street sign deception operation. It notes that many Allied units were delayed by following altered signs. The panel does not mention Charlie Company specifically or Lieutenant Brenner by name. But his influence is there. His insistence that the truth be told. In 2019, a documentary film crew interviewed surviving members of the 1st Airborne Division for a project about Operation Market Garden. Private Holland was one of the interviewees. He was 94 years old. His memory was clear. His voice was strong. The interviewer asked about the first night in Arnhem. Holland described following Lieutenant Brenner through dark streets. He described the street sign. The realization that they were lost. The German tanks. The transformation from assault force to survival cell. "Do you blame the lieutenant?" the interviewer asked. Holland was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "No. Brenner made a mistake. But he made it trying to accomplish an impossible mission with inadequate information in impossible circumstances. That's what leadership is. Making decisions when you don't have enough information. Living with the consequences." Brenner lived with those consequences for 39 years. That's punishment enough. The interview was never used in the final documentary. The filmmakers decided it was too complex. Too ambiguous. Audiences wanted clear narratives. Heroes and villains. Triumph or tragedy. What they did not want was the messy reality. The lieutenant who made a mistake. The men who followed him. The enemy who created the conditions for error. The system that demanded the impossible. But the interview exists. Archived. Available to researchers who want to understand what really happened. Not the sanitized version. Not the heroic narrative. But the truth. Brenner followed a street sign. The sign was wrong. Everything that followed was consequence. The street sign in the Arnhem War Museum sits behind glass. Visitors photograph it. They read the explanatory text. They move to the next display. The sign remains. A small piece of metal. An artifact of deception. A reminder that war is won and lost through attention to details that seem insignificant until they prove decisive. And somewhere in the museum archives is a copy of Lieutenant Brenner's after-action report. The document is brief. Technical. But in its final paragraph, Brenner wrote something that transcends military doctrine. Trust nothing in war except your training, your men, and your willingness to question what appears obvious. The enemy will use your assumptions against you. Every shortcut is a potential trap. Every certainty is a possible deception. Verification takes time. Error takes lives. Choose accordingly. These words were written by a 24-year-old lieutenant who had failed to verify a street sign and lost 101 men over 4 days of fighting. They represent not just tactical advice but moral understanding. The knowledge that comes from making mistakes that kill people. The wisdom purchased with others' blood. This is the heritage of Operation Market Garden. Not glory. Not triumph. But lessons. Hard lessons. Expensive lessons. Lessons written in the casualties of men who followed street signs through darkness toward objectives they would never reach. The bridge stands. The memorial stands. The museum preserves artifacts. And the lesson remains, in war, trust nothing without verification. The cost of assumption is measured in lives.